everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History Value podcast. And today I'm joined by David Fitzgerald. And today's discussion is based on his book, The Mormons. And the link to purchase the book will be in the description below and the pinned comment. With that being said, David, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, it's great to be back. How you doing, Jacob?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
All right, so let's get right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about who Joseph Smith was?
Sure. I mean, we could dance around who he was to the Mormons, but in a pinch, he was a con artist, and he went on to believe his own, drink his own Kool-Aid, and finally wound up spinning a story that went out of control and wound up in him the whole thing falling apart for him and leading to his death. That's the extremely short version of extremely long and fascinating and crazy-making story that I talk about in the book. I think the most interesting thing about him, though, is that it's not just Joseph Smith who was the ringleader of the church. There was a whole rose gallery of other figures who were also preying on the flock, if you will.
Let me put it this way. How did Joseph Smith start movement? How did he get the idea of the gold tablets? What did he claim to what kind of revelation did he claim to have gotten?
Yeah.
Started this whole thing.
The funny thing about it is there's lots of different stories because the story kept changing and he kept changing the story. But one thing that we know for sure is that during the time he was supposedly disenchanted with all the churches of the time and secretly, inquiring of the Lord, which was the one true church, in this very spiritual phase of his life. That was also when he was arrested for being what's called a glass looker and a con artist who had been working with local farmers and landowners, saying that there was a silver mine, a Spanish silver mine on their property, and that he was going to use his screening stone, his magical device to locate it. And he was really steeped in all this kind of folk magic. This was the whole period of Ichabod Crane and Rip Van Winkle and all these really nutty Grimm's fairy tale types ideas were really popular at the time. And so, there was dowsers, which are still around, but in his particular con that he was doing at the time, it was using this, what is called a seeing stone, to find this silver mine. And he kept saying that, the enchantment on the gold is too strong today. I can't get it. Or say, some mysterious angel or some mischievous ghost is moving the treasure around through the earth. And so after a couple weeks of this, months of this, they finally wised up and took him to court and sued him successfully. And for the longest time, the church denied that this could have ever have happened, especially during this period of his career, until they found the actual court transcript from 1826. I think it was 1972 that showed up. And then they had to respin their whole defense of him again. But they couldn't say that this was just some lie that his enemies had made up when they actually found it.
What are these gold tablets that he claimed to possess?
Right. I should have jumped right to that. So, yeah, at one of the stories he was spinning, and again, these weren't totally original to him because there was a thing in Canada called the Golden Bible. And at one point, he told a friend of his that, he was carrying around a sack, but inside it was the Gold Bible that he'd heard about from Canada, and that if anybody looked at it, they would die. And from that, he went on to building a case for his Gold Bible and a pillowcase to cover the Bible itself, because again, nobody could look at it or they would be killed instantly. And he went from there to translating it and the rest of the story. If you've seen the South Park episode, they do a pretty spot-on depiction of how it happened. The only difference was that he had a magical stone in his hat that he kept looking at when he was translating. That's the only thing they left out. and there was a curtain drawn so that no one would look at the gold tablets as well. But apart from that, I thought they did a great job of depicting the ins and outs of that story. And again, these were supposed to be plates of gold from the prophet Moroni, the angel Moroni, the prophet Mormon. Wasn't trying to make a cheap shot there. And they were depicted this whole history of the North American continent that no one had ever seen before. But of course, it was exactly what like the crackpots of the time were saying, that the mound building Indians were obviously, there were some white people that did this, because all the Indians we knew were red, merciless savages who could never have done such architecture. So it must have been white people, therefore they must have been a lost tribe of Israel. And he just went with all these ideas and ran with them. And he'd been doing that since he was a little kid. His mother said that he would tell stories about the Mound Indians as if he lived with them his whole life. He was a very imaginative kid, and kind of shameless in his propensity to just spin the stories and just tell you unflinching bullshit right to your face. And of course, that's what eventually led to him creating a church out of this. But it's interesting, for the longest time, for the first 10 or 20 years, apparently the story of him meeting God and Jesus and them telling him, oh no, you've got to start your own church. He never told that story. That story didn't come until way after. In fact, I think it didn't come out until after his death. So it kind of blows my mind how little the early believers in the church knew about what everybody knows today about how the church began. And how it just kept reinventing itself and refining the story. And I talk about this a lot in the book, and I do apologize. It's been ages since I've been this, because I've dealt with this book because I've been dealing with books on Jesus' historicity and the historicity of the evolution of world religions. But there's so much that Mormonism is crammed in, just barely 200 years. It's fascinating, and yeah, we could talk all day about just one aspect of that.
We have a super chat question from iFishNtai. Thank you for your super chat. Thoughts on the Los Lunas Decalogue stone in New Mexico?
I am not familiar with that. The Los Lunas Decalogue stone. No, that's new to me. I could tell you about the Strangite plates and other Mormon spin-offs, but yeah, that's a new one on me.
So what other kind of claims did Joseph Smith make about Native Americans, Mesoamericans, and their interaction or connection to ancient Israel?
Right. As I alluded to earlier, yeah, he went on that bandwagon of authors at the time who had written books like something, the Genesis of the Hebrews. What was it? I'm messing up the title. But there were several books at the time coming out that involved a whole unknown history of white people in the Americas, and they were all meant to have been a lost tribe of Israel that came over. Well, his take on it was that they all came over in what we would call submarines, basically. The Jaredites coming in these double-hulled ships that came across in hundreds of years before Columbus, hundreds of years before the Vikings, thousands even, before the time of Christ, or just right after the time of Christ, because Christ also came over after his crucifixion, came to the New World and met with all these ancient civilizations, which they called Lamanites and Jaredites and Nephites. A whole Lord of the Rings level fan fiction of biblical sci-fi, for lack of a better term, and he used it to explain any kind of archaeological marvel or new discovery, like this discovery of Thomas Jefferson about mastodons and mammoths in the New World. So he had to slip in these elephant things in his book as well. So to some people who were reading this for the first time, it seemed like, oh, wow, this is accurately predicting what we only just knew now. But he put in so much stuff that just has never shown up in the archaeological record, like silver, like gold, coins and swords and armor, different coinage that he invents completely. And the New World never had any of that in there. Frank Zindler wrote a great essay talking about, it's one thing to say, we don't have archaeological evidence, but you're talking about steel swords, and it's like, how do you lose a steel mill? How do these battlefields where these things happen, how come we don't have tons of artifacts from them, let alone all the bone meal in there left over from all the bodies who were there?
What kind of major stories did Joseph Smith take from the Bible and significantly alter and or beef up?
I'm glad you asked that, and I meant sure I marked the part in the book where I talk about that, because about 25,000 words in the Book of Mormon come straight from the Old Testament, with another 2,000 from the New Testament. And even when he's not copying verbatim, there's plenty of less obvious borrowings. For instance, of the 355 names in the Book of Mormon, over 100 come directly from the Bible, and over 100 are simply slightly altered biblical names. Mark Twain himself noted this, said, whenever Joseph Smith found his speech growing too modern, which is about every sentence or so, he ladled in a few words, scriptural phrases like exceedingly sore and it came to pass, etc., etc. And he said, and it came to pass was his pet. If he had left this out, his Bible would have been only a pamphlet. Here's some things he has done in the King James Bible. I'll say this too. Some of the mistakes he makes in his Book of Mormon retelling of scriptural things, actually we can tell which version of the King James Version he was using, because he repeats their mistakes or he repeats their wording, even though some of these are like later scholarly notes that were added on long after the fact, and yet he throws them in as if they were there all along. So it's not only obvious that he was copying from the Bible, but we can tell he was borrowing from the 1769 Bible in particular. There's things he cribbed, like in the Bible, John the Baptist is killed when Herodias' daughter dances before the king. It pleases him, and she asks for his head as a reward. In the Book of Mormon, the beautiful daughter of Jared dances before the king, pleases him, and is coached to ask for her father's head as a reward. Paul and Silas are freed from prison by an earthquake, just like Alma and Amulek are freed from earthquake from prison. Lazarus is raised from the dead. Lamoni gets deathly sick, but the prophet Ehrman, just like Jesus, says that although he stinks, he really only sleeps and he'll rise again. Jesus asks Lazarus' sister, "Do you believest thou this?" Lamoni's queen, Ammon asks Lamoni's queen, "Believest thou this?" She replies, "I believe," just like Lazarus' sister replied, "I believe." And so she rises again. And we can give example after example after this. I've got pages and pages of this. And so there's not, and even he's also plagiarized from things like William Shakespeare. There's arguments he plagiarized from Samuel Spaulding's book and other books at the time. So it's not even a question of did he plagiarize, but where we can find it, how much he is plagiarized, and was there more that he plagiarized from. But there's no shortage of possible plagiarism, but especially from the Bible, especially from the Old Testament.
So in general, how much changes to the story has he made?
Oh,
significant?
Yeah, constantly. He's constantly borrowing motifs and scenarios from the Bible, and then just changing the names. And sometimes even the names aren't even changed that much. They still have the same initials, for instance. Things like that he does. And again, this book is what, 300 and some odd pages, and it's just full of stuff like that. It also gets much deeper into the history of the early church as far as when he started it, what happened during the time of him that he was running it, after his assassination, and all the way up until basically till today. In fact,
Did they ever figure out what these tablets really are? Did anyone look at them? Did anyone see them?
no one saw them. No one looked at them. And in fact, church doctrine is built on the fact that there was 3 witnesses, and then there was another 8 witnesses, and they all said they saw them and handled them and read them and could vouch for them. And then years later, they accidentally let it slip. One of them, Martin Harris, said, "Well, I didn't actually see it because otherwise we'd instantly die. But I saw it with the eye of faith, just like I could see, a pin in a pin case or a city through a mountain." And the moment he did that, instantly 5 high church officials said, "All right, we're out of here," boom, and left the church forever and never came back. He tried to backpedal that, but the damage was done, and it's just one. That's just one aspect of many things that should have been a deal killer for the whole thing. And there was moment after moment after moment where it's like, surely that's going to be the end of this church, and nope, it just managed to keep going. Even as late as the 80s, the 1980s, where there was this whole scandal about the Mormon murders. I don't know if you saw, there was a great Netflix documentary about it, about these bombings that occurred in Salt Lake City. And what it turned out was that there was a gentleman named Mark Hofmann who worked for the church, and he was a devout Mormon, and he had a knack for doing historical research and coming across really interesting early Mormon artifacts, we'll call them, letters, documents, and what he started happening is he started finding documents that were like early versions of Joseph's of his visions, where he says, "Oh no, it wasn't an angel; it was a golden salamander," or "It wasn't this; it was that," and like really earth-shaking documents that, if they came out, it would not look good for the church. And what would happen was he would say, "What should I do, grand poobahs of the church? Here's these things." And they'd say, "Okay, we'll buy those off you, and we'll put it in our church archives." Okay, that's totally fine. He would do that, and then it would get leaked to the press that these things existed, and the church would have to admit, "Yeah, we have it here." And so this happened again and again and again. And he was it turned out this Hofmann character was playing them like a fiddle. He was coming up with the idea of some document. He'd forge it, make it look authentic. They would see it. They would freak out saying, "Oh no, we can't let the church see this." And they would buy it and throw it in the archive. Then he would secretly leak to the press that they had it. They would have to come out and do this. And this happened again and again and again. And he was just getting richer and richer and more locked in with the church. More prestige, more artifacts would come his way. He just played them like a fiddle. And then one day, somebody was asking about a thing called the McLellin collection. And he said, "Oh yes, I've come across the McLellin collection. I have it. I can get that to you." And he should have really done his homework first, because it turned out the McLellin collection is like an orange crate size box of all these different artifacts and documents. And he realized, "Oh no, I've gone too far. I can't do this." So that's when he started putting bombs in Salt Lake City and killing people to take them off the track of that he was actually a forger. The third bomb, unfortunately, went off in his car. And so not only did they find him wounded and his car blown up, but they found all his forgery materials in the trunk. And so he wound up going to prison. And he's still in prison today. And about 6 months into the trial, this is probably my favorite part. A archivist from the church archive said, "Oh, by the way, I found out we have the McLellin collection. We've had it in our collection since 1906. That the whole time all this happened, and they had been sitting on it so deep that they'd forgotten about it." And it's like, it blows my mind that wasn't the end of the church right there when that became public. But here we are. Of course, you could say the same thing about the Catholic Church. You would have thought they'd be done too for all the shenanigans they've been up to, but here we are.
Can you elaborate more on the McLellin collection and how it damages the church?
Yeah, basically, it was meant to be a collection of all these different writings from early church members. I can't remember if there was any physical artifacts as well, but it was clearly something he could not forge in the time that he had to be able to hand it over. That's basically what brought him down, Mark Hofmann down. As far as what it was, he investigated like early church writings, letters, correspondence, early versions of Smith's visions, early versions of things from other church leaders. So is that kind of thing. The irony of it, no matter what it was, no matter what this stuff was, is that the church leaders, they always pride themselves on having these gifts of discernment and these spiritual, they're more spiritually evolved than your regular members because they can like translate and they can cure wounds and things like that. If you're a bishop, they'll usually be having, this vial of like holy water that the Mormon equivalent that they use to heal people who are in traffic accidents, things like that. But all these so-called discerning, translating guys totally fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. And there's just no two ways around it. It's like, you didn't know that he was playing you this whole time. And you couldn't translate this yourself with your magic Mormon powers. It just does not look good for them at all. And we could talk about other cases like that, because archaeological fraud is like a cornerstone of the Mormon Church. The Book of Abraham, the Book of Breathings that it was based on. All these parts of key Mormon scriptures are actually Egyptian artifacts that Joseph Smith bought from traveling salesman types, from circuses, and then he would translate them. But what he didn't know is that we were already starting to translate Egyptian writings at that time. And so he was putting a smoking gun in his mouth even every time he said, "Oh, look, here's a new Egyptian thing, and this is what it says, I'll tell you." Remember that the Book of Mormon was supposedly translated from Reformed Egyptian, which is not a thing. But now we can actually read Egyptian, and we know that when he says this, it really means that. And in fact, they've actually found his original copy of that very same book, and you can see his notations on it and the things he's changed as well.
It's amazing how.
Sorry, I just gonna say there's
so
many rabbit holes like this they can keep going on. I'm kind of juggling all these balls in the air as we speak.
I mean, it's amazing. He's so obviously a con man. Doesn't want people to see the tablets. Claims that they'll die if they see it.
Yeah,
It's like he's ripping off, looking into the eyes of Medusa. Greek mythology turns you into stone.
yeah. And again, we know this story forward and back, but apparently the early church didn't know any of this until later. So they were even going faith in him based on even less than that. It blows my mind how trusting they were and how they followed him, even though so many people wound up dying and suffering because they chose to follow him. And even he wound up being a victim of his own notoriety. But there was a point when his militia, the Nauvoo garrison, was bigger than the United States Army. And there was a time when he was actually running for president of the United States, or considering running for president of the United States. Can you imagine the way American history would have played out had any of that, if we'd had a civil war against the Mormons? And there was several Mormon wars, don't get me wrong. But if we had actually had a Mormon takeover of the White House in the early 1800s, it's just...
That would have sucked.
That would have sucked. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. But yeah, who knows what our history books would look like then.
Right.
Yeah. And
Let's,
again, that's just Joseph. We're not even getting into like the Brigham Young and all these other guys who kind of gathered around them. But there's so many wild characters in early Mormonism, and they're just all scoundrels. They're just amazing sociopaths. And the whole church, the early history of the church, if not the history of all churches everywhere, is a history of sociopathy. You started.
Let's go back.
Yeah, let's
go ahead.
Yeah, I thought you were starting to say something. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Joseph Smith's life.
Yeah.
So at one point in his life, did his movement start to gain a lot of attention?
Early on, it had a small following, and it had a small devoted following. It suffered a lot, and that suffering, ironically, tends to make a fledgling church more cohesive. There's been some sociological theories that if your church doesn't suffer some kind of persecution, it probably won't last. It'll probably just fade away. But if it's like these churches that predict the end of the world, and it comes and goes, and maybe you'll lose half the people then, but the other half that stays, they will double down because they just sunk too much of their life and their personality into this, their identity into this religion, and they're not going to let it go. And that's definitely what happened to Mormonism. I think it would probably, I'm sure we could find the numbers easily enough. And if my friend Bryce Blankenagel was here, he'd probably tell you right off the top of his head. But it definitely, by the time they started setting up their own new cities in various parts of the country, clear before Utah. I mean, by the time they went to Utah, that's a whole different phase of the religion. But once they started going big, they started sending missionaries to Europe, and all these refugees from the Industrial Revolution found it really appealing, the thought of going and getting involved with this new religion in the Americas. And so they started growing by leaps and bounds once they started proselytizing actively. And it was rough going. There was lots of up and downs for the church. And again, the whole time he had his finger on his thumb on it. They were definitely under his sway. And even when he finally, people were in active rebellion against him. For instance, there was the guy who owned the newspaper press that called him out as a false prophet. They still thought he was a prophet. They thought he was a fallen prophet. But that's the crazy thing to me too, is like they don't see that he's lying to them. They see that he's went power mad or something, but that he was a real prophet and he's just fell from grace. Which is, from one way of looking at, yeah, that's true, because he definitely got to the point where it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and his ambitions got bigger and bigger, and you can't undo that. You can't back down from that when it gets to a certain trajectory, and it just got spiraled crazy and crazier, out of control. We haven't even talked about the sex. We haven't talked about the sex scandals at all, but we could spend all night just talking about Joseph Smith's sex scandals and polygamy. Yeah. So in the official church histories, there was a girl, I want to say her name is Fanny Bryce, was the first one, his first plural wife. But to everyone who's alive when Joseph was alive, it was just that girl he had an affair with in the barn, and Emma caught them. And it wasn't until long after his death they said, "Oh, this must have been one of his plural wives." But yeah, he was such a horn dog, constantly going behind her back and hooking up with young girls. And then later, of course, much later, he developed the everlasting doctrine of polygamy, which was going to be an eternal covenant for all time, and we'll never back down on that until Utah tried to become a state, and they said, well, no, not while you're doing polygamy. And so, boom, miracle, new revelation. Yeah, we're going to put, it's spiritually, it's still going to be going on. It's forever and ever in heaven, but we'll just, yeah, they have workarounds for all these things. Very amusing, very amusing. And of course, after Joseph Smith, Brigham Young wound up having 50 plus wives as well. The last time I was in Salt Lake City, there's a place called the Lion House, which was his residence, and all the residents of his wives. And so we took a tour of it. They don't mention a word about all the wives. There's just, and here's another bedroom, here's another bedroom, here's another bedroom, here's another bedroom. They do not mention wives at all. At all. Yeah.
Yes. Talk about making Solomon's 1,000 wives a real thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So as he kept changing this stuff up, so rapidly and so quickly, did he have any early scandals or people that left, high up people that left because this kept happening?
Big time. Yeah, I mentioned the one when that the 5 that took off when Martin Harris actually blabbed that he didn't really see it. But there was a whole period called the Mormon Reformation, but we might as well call it the Mormon Cultural Revolution, because they cracked down on people who were trying to leave. Hey, don't eat that. That's electric. That'll kill you. Come here, monkey butt. Sorry about that. Yeah, there was time when they were not letting people escape Utah to go out. There was a very famous case where Brigham Young was tired of women complaining. He said, "Look, you sisters want to leave. You can go ahead and leave." And they said, "Okay." And a bunch of them wanted to leave, and he quickly turned that around. So that didn't happen. But
who could blame them?
There were people who
get the hell out of there.
Sorry?
I said, who can blame them? Get the hell out of there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, talking about just the dynamic of what it was like to be a young woman in early Mormon time. Hang on a sec. I've got a cat who's dying to eat the cord here, which will kill you. Go on, beat it. Beat it, you punk. All right. It won't just cut off our thing. It'll just kill her dead. Anyway, yeah, there were guys who were killed before they were allowed to escape because they thought they would blab about things like the Mountain Meadows massacre, which was I don't know if you're familiar with that or if your listeners are, but there was a wagon train coming from, I believe, Arkansas, if I remember correctly, and they happened to come across at a bad time when tensions were really high between the Mormon Church and the United States, and also Arkansas and the church. There had been persecutions there, and that was one of the places they had fled from. And so when they found out this wagon train was going through Utah territory, rumors started spreading that, these were guys who persecuted the church. So a bunch of Mormons went and disguised themselves as Indians, and apparently there's also a group of Indians with them as well. And they attacked the wagon train. Finally, one of the Mormons showed up, and under the flag of truce, and convinced them, okay, it's all been a horrible misunderstanding. These Indians, and we've talked them out of it. So come with us, surrender your weapons, come with us, and we'll get you all sorted out in Salt Lake City. And then they executed them all and killed all the men, started butchering the women. They left like maybe 8 children. Sorry, don't quote me on that number, but all children under the age of 5 or 6. that they didn't think would be able to testify against them. And there were some really grim moments where they were basically killing kids that they thought were no, if they're too smart, they'll figure it out. So, and they took all these children. I forget the exact number of children that they brought in, the surviving children, into the church. It was a huge, huge scandal, and it happened during the Civil War, and so and the authorities were Brigham Young. So the whole thing got squished down, and the investigation stymied for like 17 years until they finally sorted out more or less what had happened, and were able to rescue these children who had been adopted into local families. But they never really, I mean, the ringleader was executed, but I mean, this thing went all the way to the top to sorry, I keep doing that, to Brigham Young. And that never all came to light. They got away with it.
Why did it take so long, 17 years, to sort that out?
Well, a couple reasons. One, it was during the Civil War, so there was all that. But the big reason was it was actively squished, the investigation stymied by everybody in Utah, basically. And it took years and years of really dogged investigation against just absolute stonewalling. But the fact that they could find the loot, that was known to belong to the settlers, they found them in like Mormon homes, and I think Brigham Young himself had one of the carriages that they knew. But I think that the real testament was that the children who survived, when they spoke out about what happened, it was just hard to deny it. And once they were able to get those kids out from under the grasp of the church, that's what really cracked it open.
When did things start not going Joseph Smith's way in general?
Oh. It's funny because I've mentioned this in the book. There were so many times when this whole thing could have fallen apart. Early on, it's really just a perfect storm of people who are just desperate to believe what he's selling, and who refuse to give it up, even while there's other people peeling off from the church all the time, constantly. And there's waves of that. But once you've got that core group that is going to stick with him through thick and thin, and they're at the point where they can't escape even if they wanted to, that is what kept the church going. But there's so many places where it could have all just fallen apart. And it finally did, of course, for Joseph. I don't know if we got into what happened to him, but basically he alienated. Polygamy was the big thing, because they were keeping it secret at first. It was just some upper echelons of the church were the only ones that even knew about it, let alone practiced it. But once it was just harder and harder to conceal that, because everybody knows what's going on. They can see it for themselves, And even though in the sermons, in public, they're denying that it exists at all. In private, they're practicing it exclusively and saying it's this eternal thing. Once that starts coming out, there's this big. It tears the church apart. Honestly, part of that is because his wife Emma led the "oh no, this is not going to happen" front. And denied that it ever did happen. But William Law, I believe his name is the one who wrote this brand new newspaper that was just going to be there to expose the crimes of Joseph Smith and get the church back on track. It got off with one edition that really blew the lid off him, and that night a mysterious band of people came in and destroyed the printing press and ran it all out. And him destroying the printing press is what really ignited all the non-Mormons in the region. That kind of censor of the press just outraged them completely, because that was like bedrock, cornerstone of what they saw as American liberties, and rightly so. So the fact that somebody just came in and took out a newspaper that he didn't like because it was telling the truth about him, that did not go. And that's what finally got the law down on his back. He escaped, he got captured, and the militias that captured him, they were eager to kill him, and they did. Though it should be said that when he died, he had a gun in his hand. They'd been drinking wine and smoking cigars that night, yeah, that they had at least 2 pistols in with them. But the upshot of it all is that he died from that, and that was the end of him, not the end of his church.
So did he write the Book of Mormon himself, or did others help him write it?
Definitely he had help. And it would be an interesting debate we could have with me and somebody like Bryce Blankenagel or Shannon Shegrover about, did he write it or did he plagiarize it from a different book? There's a whole series, whole theory, the Spalding theory, that this reverend had written a book that was basically our Book of Mormon. There were other reverends at the time who had also written books that are similar. The idea, the concept was similar, that this was a lost tribe of Israel. So did he steal it from this guy? Did he have enough influences that he just borrowed from them and then made the rest by just cribbing a lot from the Bible and the Old Testament? There's no shortage of things he could have stolen from, and certainly did. Whoever wrote it, whether it was him or this Spalding character or somebody else altogether, they were stealing from the New Testament and the Old Testament. I mean, that's just a matter of record. We know that. We can spot it and pinpoint it. But there's lots of different other possibilities, and we don't know how much of it was him, how much was his secretary who was helping him write. He was similarly literate at best. So it wouldn't surprise me if he had to basically crib it from somebody else entirely. But if you look at the original first edition of a Book of Mormon, and they're not easy to get a hold of, but they are on record. You can look at them in digitized form. You can see the grammar is atrocious. It's just terrible. And he's very, very thin. They went a walking and they did this. It's very cornpone in places that show that it's not as highfalutin as he'd like it to be. So, yeah, that's a roundabout way of answering a question we don't really have a good, solid answer for, and lots of possibilities for. But I do talk about that in the book.
So essentially, one way or another, he wrote it, but it's a question of how much he took from others.
Exactly, and whether he was helped in that writing process by the people we refer to as his secretaries and who took taking his dictation. We don't know how much of that process was going on, but we can only see it in the results of the first edition Book of Mormon and the way they clean it up in successive editions.
Can you expand on Spalding and the Lost Tribe?
Yeah, and I don't want to go too much onto that, just Spalding, because there were other sources that he obviously were a clear influence on him. But according to the people who followed the Spalding theory, Reverend Spalding had his manuscript at a printer's, and Joseph worked at that printer's as an apprentice. And the story goes that he just found this manuscript, loved it, and stole it whole cloth. It's very possible. It's extremely possible. We just don't know for sure. But again, if there weren't other sources as well, then I'd feel more confident saying, yeah, he probably did steal it. But there's just lots of possibilities for this Spalding to be true or not. It wouldn't surprise me, wouldn't shock me. Just it's hard to be certain on something that's changed and has been so through the ringer and so through the mill so many times. It's hard to say.
So what happened after Joseph Smith's death?
Then once the charismatic leader had disappeared, then the money guy, who wasn't so charismatic but was it's like Lenin and Stalin. Lenin was this charismatic figure. Stalin, you did all the grunt work and was brutal. And we see that kind of dynamic in a lot of different religions. Actually, the same thing sort of happened to the Jehovah's Witnesses. But basically, you have the charismatic guy is gone, and now the brass tacks money guy comes in, and who's got some business sense, and he takes it from there. That's when they go off and head out to Utah and turn that into its own Mormon Mecca. That's where a lot of the things that we think of as core Mormonism came about. The doctrines I'm talking about, again, Joseph. There we go again. Brigham Young was just as polygamous as Joseph Smith had been, and he was ruthless. He was absolutely ruthless. During the whole Civil War, they were just sitting in Utah hoping, yeah, go kill each other, and then we'll come out on top. And I'm sure that they didn't lose their ambitions to like take over the whole country at any point. It just didn't work out for them that way.
Was the church divided on who would lead after Smith's death?
Yeah, there was a whole soap opera of possibilities, and Brigham Young is the one that came out on top of that. But there was, again, like I say, there's a whole rogues gallery of early church leaders and famous figures in the church, and many of them threw their hat in the ring, and just they couldn't compete with Brigham Young. He just was just too tough for them.
How does Joseph Smith and his founding of Mormonism remind you of other religions?
It's interesting that in a lot of ways it was always compared to Islam, and that this was like the American Mormonism was the American version of Islam, and in a lot of ways it is. It's the military aspect of it, the Quran or the sword. And there was a whole time in early Mormon history where they had that mindset too. Again, at one point, their army was bigger than the United States Army, and things could have gone very differently for the church and for the United States. It's interesting to me. I'm known as a Jesus mythicist, and I know a little bit about Mormonism. I know a lot about mythicism, and I've been learning a lot about the origins of various religions. And the one commonality I seem to be finding more and more is that when you look at the founder figures of religion, they all seem to start with a mythical founder. And when I'm talking about Mormonism, I'm not talking about Joseph Smith. He's not the founder. It's the Church of the Mormons. It's the prophet Mormon who is their mythical founder. And the angel Moroni, the guy with the trumpet on top of their temples, those are the founders of Mormonism, and they're completely mythical. All the people we know, like Joseph Smith, like L. Ron Hubbard, all the ones, the modern period that we know actually who wrote the books. Those are the exceptions that prove the rules. Back in the day, it's those guys, we don't know their names. We just know the books they wrote and who they attributed to their writings to. So like your Moseses, your Buddhas, your Jesuses, even figures like King David and Solomon that are nominally historical, but we don't have any archaeological evidence to back up that there was a kingdom at that time. At best, if there were such guys, and it seems like a long shot that there was, they were just local chieftains and not kings at all. But you can say that for almost the entire Old Testament. You can say that for all of early Islam. There was no Muhammad. That dude just did not exist in the form that we are told by early Islamicists. Uh, Same with Confucius, same with Lao Tzu, same with Buddha. And you see the same patterns of their development and of their origins, and how they go from usually an old religion gets rebooted as a new religion with a new prophet, a new take on an old religion. And it makes much more sense for the religion to have a single figure who said all this stuff, rather than lots of guys who cooked this up over time and hashed it out, all the details. It makes much more sense if it came down from heaven on golden plates or 10 Commandments. That is a much more satisfying story to sell people, and that seems to be what has happened across the board in all our major world religions. And Mormonism is just the most American of them.
Is the Muhammad analogy? It's interesting because Muhammad's only mentioned in the Quran like 4 times,
Right.
and we get the Muhammad of Islam's pretty much more like the guy in the Hadith.
Yeah, exactly. I could not agree more. In fact, if you read the portions that are said to be involved Muhammad, you would first of all, you wouldn't even know what they were talking about, full stop. But you'd have no idea that this is an angel talking to Muhammad, because they give no context whatsoever for so much. It's all hadith, and yeah, I cannot stress that enough. That it's all after the fact, and that's generations after the fact. That's 50 or 60 years after the time that the religion is supposed to have started. And I talk about that in the book Playing God. Book 3 is all about the origins of Islam, and how what we think of as Islam really doesn't show up until after the first or second Muslim civil war, and they start needing a way to unite this Arab empire that's multicultural and multinational and multilingual, and they do it by creating an Arabic religion. But the Arabic conquests were not inspired by this religion. This religion came about because of the Arab conquests, and that's where we have it backwards. That's where it's flipped, in my humble opinion, and other scholars as well.
And in my final question, how do you think Mormonism? Let me rephrase. Why do you think Mormonism managed to survive despite all the major early scandals that have
That's
occurred?
a great question, and I wish I knew the answer. I don't know if I can give a better answer than that. People double down, and you'll lose some of them, but the ones who stay, that core of the faithful, if you can keep a small core of the faithful, and then they build on each other and build and build and build it. Mormonism itself, it's not the fastest growing religion in the world. It's not even the most proselytizing religion. The only reason it sticks around is because that core group kept having babies and still keeps having babies. And to the point where we could call Mormonism an ethnic group, because for all their worldwide missionary work, the ones that stick around aren't the converts, it's the missionaries themselves. And they just keep finding ways to bind that society together in just multiple ways. It's so tight-knit. And as long as they keep having children, they'll keep being a Mormon church. And it does not hurt, too, that they've branched out into all these business ventures and make so much money of it that the whole thing is like a family business that makes bajillions of dollars. And there's been whole books written just on the money aspects of the church's holdings. And again, I talk about that in the book as well as things like Mormon on Mormon fraud. It turns out that Utah is the capital of fraud in America, and most of it is Mormon on Mormon fraud. Things that blew my mind before I started working on the book. Because I went into it more interested in things like Mormon archaeology and how the things that are saying just do not add up at all. And their doctrines are so crazy. I call it steampunk Scientology in the book. It's just wackadoodle and fascinating. But the fact is, as for a church, I mean, for any organization that doesn't have to pay taxes, they make book. They own a lot of stuff, radio stations, cattle ranches. Huge holdings.
Before we close, I'd like to remind everybody real quick, the link to purchase the Mormons will be in the description below and the pinned comment. And with that being said, David, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks so much. And I'll have to look up the super chat question, because now I'm very curious about that. But yeah, thanks again. And thanks for putting up for my stammering as I went down one rabbit hole after another. There's still plenty more in this book.
Oh, no, I thought it was great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good to see you again, Jacob. Take
Likewise.
care.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.